Great. Welcome. It's so nice to see you all, such a good group of people, and for such an important topic. My name is Robin Tress. I'm the co-executive director of the Council of Canadians, and I'm thrilled to see so many people here. I'm so glad you could join us tonight. We're here to talk about something that I think is really important to all of us: public, national Pharmacare. So we're here at St. Mary's University, which is of course on the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. And I'd like to recognize this as we're doing any work related to social justice, because we need to remember that that's a real starting point for all conversations that we have relating to justice, because that's a primary condition of our presence here. And I want to just introduce the Council of Canadians a bit while we get started. You might know us, you might not. We're a national organization that's been working for social justice, defending people, planet, and democracy since 1985. It's been a little while. We are really glad to be able to be working on public pharmacare and to see all of you here working with us. We've had a lot of co-sponsors for this event tonight, so I just want to name a few important people who are here with us. The Nova Scotia Federation of Labour is a great co-host, and Hugh Gillis is here representing them. And then, well, we have a few people who are wearing two hats. So from the Nova Scotia Health Coalition and the NSGEU, we have Mary Otto and Peter Perry, who are over here. Representing that Health Coalition as their fearless staff person is Ali. Thank you, Ali. We're also so glad to have support from South House in this event tonight. And of course, our good friend Avi Lewis, who I'll introduce in a moment. You've noticed that we've been handing out masks at the door. I know that's not always common practice anymore, but I thought with this conversation, which is about health and justice and equity, it's very important that we make this space to have this important conversation about pharmacare as accessible and as safe as possible. Of course, all spaces are places where people should feel safe to participate, but with this conversation in particular being of such importance to people with chronic illness and disability, I'll ask everyone to take an extra precaution and make this a safer space for everyone here by putting on a mask. If you don't have one, we've got a huge box and we'll pass them out. And I really appreciate you taking that extra step to keep everyone in this room safe. So thank you very much. So let's get to it. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to hear some remarks from Avi, and we're going to have a big group conversation with a whole lot of very impressive people. We're going to learn some stuff that's going to make you really mad, and then it's going to make you want to do something about it. And then we're going to do something about it. So great to see you all. I'll bring on Avi Lewis, who you might know as a filmmaker, a climate activist, currently a professor at the University of British Columbia, and maybe most importantly, Naomi Klein's partner. Yes. So, thank you, Avi.
Thank you all. Initially, just great gratitude to the Council of Canadians for fighting the good fight, decade after decade. For so long, the Council was really connected to and identified with Maud Barlow, and I marched with Maud against NAFTA, and we got tear gassed together in Quebec City and fighting the free trade area of the Americas, and I had her on my show back in the early Mesozoic era when I was on CBC, when they allowed, raving, frothing leftists on our national broadcaster, when it was a propaganda outlet for that 1 hour a night for the side of the spectrum that is so little represented in the rest of our national discourse. But there's a new generation of kick-ass organizers of the Council, and Robin and Nik and Mary and others here, who have initiated this campaign, I think, at a critical moment, and I was really moved and flattered to be asked to be part of it. It's something that we as Canadians, I think it's kind of cute that when you ask a Canadian what it means to be Canadian, they say, it's a negative identity, we're not American. Which I think is healthy. I mean, it's harder to build, authoritarian nationalism when your national identity is a negative. But that's not really good enough. If you dig a little deeper, it's a public program that's our national identity. It's a policy that is our national identity. How magnificently nerdy is that? But our cherished universal public health care was never universal. It was never fully public. It's fraught with problems, and it was from the beginning. And Tommy Douglas's dream, and it's too associated with Tommy, because of course it was a movement, not a man, that brought this to us, is in crisis now, like never before. And I'm living in British Columbia for the last few years. I don't know anyone with a family doctor. People are terrified to take their kids to an overflowing ER. Sometimes the pharmacy shelves are empty of basic medicines. And the privatizers are moving in, licking their chops at the prospect. In the 60s, when national health care was first fought for, it was a battle against the doctors striking the doctors' lobby, yes, but it was a battle against the gigantic American private insurance industry that we won. And they have never stopped looking for the cash cow that is the Canadian healthcare system. And so we meet, at a moment when the healthcare crisis is really only one of many that we're living through. And I won't depress the room unduly by listing them for you, but we have to acknowledge that we're living in a time of intersected crises, of cascading, linked crises. And we've lost a lot of ground on a lot of fronts, whether it's people dying of toxic drug supply, which is another kind of drug crisis, people who are in the midst of climate disasters that are accelerating, while our government continues to approve and subsidize new fossil fuel projects. The housing emergency is a true emergency. It's a generational emergency. And all of these things are connected. And at the same time, as we have failed to defend and failed to expand the promise of a progressive welfare state, we see racism and authoritarianism and a new ethno-nationalism rising. And so these are in some ways terrifying times. Pandemic arrives and suddenly people remember, oh yeah, when the shit hit the fan, we wanted the government to come to our aid. The expression of our collective will, the repository of public resources. And they did, they spent hundreds of billions of dollars. Remember when it came out in the last few months that child poverty in Canada had plummeted by something like, I think it was like 20%? Because they gave people $2,000 a month to live on in the pandemic. Right. That was a holy shit moment. Yeah, for sure. Child poverty, the scourge, we just can't figure out what to do with it. Oh right, we gave people the basics. And we took a big chunk out of the child poverty rate for the first time in history. So suddenly people remembered that government can do big things. And this is a very important political moment, because we have that recent lived memory of coming together around something and the government providing universal welfare, just in a moment. But it was a glimpse of what we can win now. The reason these things don't happen is pretty simple, and it's also the reason why we're here. We are living through a moment of corporate triumphalism. That honestly, like my grandpa, David Lewis, back in 1972, ran that fantastic federal campaign against Justin's dad. Remember the corporate welfare bums? Yeah, I knew there'd be some folks here that remember that. I can't even imagine what my grandpa's thinking in whatever plane of existence he inhabits these days. To look on the feasting at the public trough, the public treasure that corporations get to do these days. And that power and the capture of government and the lobbying and the culture that's been created in our political class, where there's just this begrudging hatred of the public. And yet they will shovel hundreds of billions of dollars into banks and corporations at a moment's notice, as long as there's a veneer that there will be some public good. When it's much less expensive, much more efficient to just provide things under public ownership for universal public good. It's just so basic. We know this. So now the corporate profits are just cartoonish now. Like last year, they hit 1/5 of the entire economic activity of Canada. 20% of the GDP was the share of corporate profits. 1/5 of the economy was corporate profit in a time when people can't find a place to live. In a time when the Bank of Canada is attacking working people by jacking up interest rates and forcing people out of their houses. In a time when people are literally choosing between food and medicine, which is what we're here to talk about tonight. And meanwhile, the corporate welfare bumps are now looking down from their shuttles on the way to Mars as we try to organize in the wreckage down here on Earth. But luckily, there are plenty of us. Look at this turnout tonight. Seriously. So we need a win. Where do we start? I've got a proposal. Public Pharmacare now. Yeah. Now the thing about something like single-payer, universal public pharmacare is that it's what I've been doing a little bit of teaching in universities. Forgive me if I'm getting a little wonky in my middle age. It's what these folks in the New Left in the 1960s called a non-reformist reform. A reform that we can win, that takes on the central challenge of our time, that actually tilts where the power resides, and takes back something that belongs to all of us. A win that can actually chip away in a significant way at the forces that are enforcing the dramatic inequality of our time. It's winnable because it's an add-on to what the pieces are already in place. We have a political moment where there's a parliamentary deal between the federal Liberals and the NDP that includes an insufficient, but yet another step towards pharmacare. It's achievable because the Liberals have been promising it forever, like everything. I remember when the 1993 Red Book came out and they were promising, $10 a day childcare. That only took 30 years. We're not going to wait that long for this one.
No, waiting that long.
We've already been waiting that long. They even had a plan. They hired a former health minister, a Liberal health minister from Ontario, Eric Hoskins, to write the roadmap to how we could provide drugs at a reasonable cost for everyone. Because we pay the third highest cost for drugs among rich countries in the world. We're the only rich country in the world that has a universal public health system and doesn't have the same principle applied to their medications. So you have to go to hospital, and they give you drugs because they're there to save your life. And you don't pay for the little Dixie cup. It's just part of your health care. Then you leave, go downstairs to the pharmacy, and suddenly you're getting your wallet out. Why? It makes no sense. It doesn't make sense to most people. That's why 9 out of 10 Canadians want universal public pharmacare now.
Right.
All right. So we've got a political moment where it's on the table and deal between the NDP and the Liberals. There's a bunch of things in that deal. This is not the most specific demand, but we have a lever, we have a wedge, we have a way in. And what we need to do is force their hands. We need to build a fast and fierce, movement-based push to get our politicians to realize that this piece they don't get to fudge. This piece they don't get to band-aid over. This piece they don't get to say like they said in PEI. Here's $35 million to expand the number of drugs covered by the public registry. It's like Pharmacare again, sort of, a little bit. Just a little, please, anybody? No. We're not going to take half measures. We don't need another promise. We need the program. So what we're going to do tonight is the council has identified and brought together one of the better panels that I've ever had the pleasure to moderate. And I'm going to introduce folks. We've got 5 speakers. They're going to come on, chat with me briefly. We'll chat amongst ourselves. We'll bring you into the conversation. And then we will get to work. Petitions are going around. If they're not going around now, they're everywhere. You will not be able to avoid the petition. Do not attempt to avoid the petition tonight. Is your sacred opportunity to sign a petition so we can keep in touch and the council can let you know when the next action is. I hear you have an MP in this part of the world. Maybe that person could meet with us. Maybe we could reinforce with them how important it is that the government get to work on this program. And there's lots of other things to do as well. Robin put it perfectly in the Organizer 101 of what tonight is about. We're going to learn, get angry, the righteous, incandescent rage of people on the right side of history, and then we're going to channel that frustration into getting to work. You with me? Yeah. So I think what I'll do is I will shuffle off stage left, where I belong, and introduce folks one at a time. Bill Swan, come on up, Bill. Grab a chair and sit over there. Bill, like me, is a survivor of the film and television industry, has had his own struggles with chronic health issues and the battle to afford medication, which he will tell you about. Bill ran something called the International Health Economics Association for 25 years. I'm sorry to hear that. And then in 2016, Bill started this amazing website called Faces of Pharmacare. And as a result, he was asked to curate that section of patient stories in the Eric Hoskins report that I was referring to earlier, which is a blueprint for Pharmacare in Canada by a Liberal cabinet minister that the Liberal government asked for. So hold your spiel, Bill. I'm going to bring everybody up. And Bill has a few stories to tell. Dr. Aruna Dara is a GP with an outpatient practice who also provides hospital care to folks in Mi'kmaq. She has roles in health policy at the federal level and in medical education at Dell. I love the fact that you didn't list all the roles because they're all, especially the doctors, they're like, so many roles. So many roles. Hil, do you want to come next? Hil Hamilton is trans and chronically ill and does community and advocacy work from this position. Tonight they'll bring us testimonies from the LGBTQ+ community and folks struggling with access to medication. So Hil is here to bring the voices of others into this conversation, as well as their own. Sharon Batt is a pharmaceutical policy researcher and adjunct professor in the Department of Bioethics at Dalhousie University. Fancy. Come and sit. You have to bring your own chairs at a certain point. Sharon, in 1988, Sharon co-founded the organization Breast Cancer Action Montreal, and her work in breast cancer politics led to broader activism in health, the influence of pharmaceutical behemoths, I just added that to your bio, and the dynamics of patient groups and more, which we need to hear about. And Matthew Herder is the director of the Health Law Institute at Dalhousie and an associate professor in the faculties of medicine and law. Matthew, here, there's a chair for you. Matthew was actually a member of the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, so we'd have to practice this, the PMPRB is like the key acronym in the Pharmacare fight, because they're the independent body that sets prices for drugs in Canada, the national price regulator. And Matthew was on that body from 2018 until February of this year when he quit. Matthew's resignation was the resignation heard around the Pharmacare world. It was a resignation of principle. And a very significant development in this evolving campaign. We cannot wait to hear more about that. So what we're going to do is people are going to speak for a few minutes. I'll ask a little follow-up question, and then we'll chat amongst ourselves, and then you'll join us, and then we'll go and foment revolution together. Ready? Okay. And I'll perch City TV style at the side. Bill, grab that mic over there and tell us your story.
Hi there. I'm 60 years old now. I was diagnosed with severe asthma when I was.
You gotta bring up your mic. Who's got the mixer?
We're working on it.
We're working on it. Okay.
That's better.
You good? Okay. Yeah, I can hear myself echo. Awesome. I've been a severe asthmatic since I was 2. I didn't really realize how our system was unfinished until I came out of university. I grew up, my father was here actually, was in the Navy, we had coverage, always got my drugs, everything was great, took good care of me. Then in 1987 I graduated from here and dutifully went downtown to the Blue Cross Blue Shield office and said I would like to purchase some drug insurance fees. And they said, well, that's fine. Do you have any pre-existing conditions? And that's when I learned that term for the first time. And I said, what would that be? And they said, well, do you take drugs for anything? Well, yeah, I have asthma, I take drugs. Well, we can't cover you. And no word of a lie, I walked home completely confused, assumed I had asked it wrong and came back the next day and asked it again and was turned down. From there, I was so flummoxed and so infuriated, I just stopped taking my meds. And my meds at that time were $100 to $150 a month. And I was just out of university. It was 1987. The economy sucked. It always seems that the economy sucks. And I couldn't work, so I stopped taking my drugs. About 2 weeks later, I was in the ER. I was in the ER a total of about 4 times that summer. By the 4th time, I said, this is insane. My drugs cost a lot less than going to the hospital so often. And then I re-enrolled back in university, wrote a thesis, and it gave me access to drugs, luckily, for a while. So that kind of set the stage for a lifelong focus on drug coverage and getting drug coverage. What I learned back then is that we are so much like the US when it comes to drugs. If you're very poor, if you're elderly, and if you have a really good job, you're covered. Otherwise, you're out of luck, and a lot of people are out of luck. As Avi said, I ran the International Health Economics Association for 25 years, left that job, and was looking around for something to do, and realized I had to start telling patient stories so that people understood the real impact of what not having drugs causes. I started Faces of Pharmacare, started to roll out a little bit, and happened to come to Townhall for the Hoskins Commission, and they asked me to write the stories of the patients for that report. That was one of the most difficult and devastating things I've ever done. There were stories that where I would get off the interview on the phone and I was done for the day because of what they told me that they went through. 35 years later, I'm sitting here. Nothing has changed. What I learned for working for the Hoskins Commission is just like Americans, Canadians routinely are denied insurance because they have pre-existing conditions. And I'm just going to read a little list here because I just can't keep them all on the top of my head. They lose jobs because they have high-cost meds, or a family member has a high-cost member, and somebody at work finds out and fires them, and there's nothing you can do about that. They deal with complex access issues when they're at end of life or very sick. They have to share meds in cases so that they can both get along. They choose between basic necessities and drugs daily. They choose which condition to treat often. I have a good friend who, because she couldn't afford her $20 a month high blood pressure medication, had a stroke in January. They face medical bankruptcy. They move provinces just to get the drugs they need. Forgo insurance altogether because, frankly, the private insurance out there, unless you're in a public or in a group plan, they're just abysmal. They have difficulty getting access to insurance because they're in the gig economy. They don't have a good job to get access to insurance. They stretch supplies to make them last. You've heard stories of people with diabetes doing exactly this. They select employment only based on what the benefits are. And then they suffer job lock for the same reason. So my frustration is that when I look at the potential cost savings for a program that would save money and offer coverage for everyone in Canada, yet we sit here with our hands, we're sitting on our hands. So, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I think I'll just move down the table so we'll have a little bit more time for a conversation among us. And when I just listening to Bill describe the Canadian healthcare system when it comes to drugs, right? For racialized communities and marginalized communities, it's always been that way. It still is that way in so many ways, and you're a frontline worker in this way. What are your reflections on the gaps, in particular when it comes to medications?
I hate microphones, guys.
Lean right into it. Just make friends with it. There you go.
So I guess I'll start by saying that, I hear you, Bill. I certainly, that story of the patient who comes in because they couldn't take their insulin because they couldn't afford it, is real. And I think we talk a lot about that story, but I can tell you stories of all sorts of other things. Excuse me, the patient who comes in because they have a clot in their lung and now they can't breathe because they couldn't afford the medication that was preventing the clot that they were meant to be taking. The patient who comes in because now they're not quite eating right and now their other medications aren't quite working the way they're supposed to. There's 1,000 stories for 1,000 patients, and it is, it's heartbreaking to see. I think, one of the things that I find the most frustrating about this entire thing is that not only did we have a hospice report, we actually have a blueprint. We have what a formulary might look like. It exists. We have these paths forward. The work kind of behind the scenes has been happening, and so Pat last year put out a report that said, hey, here's what a potential formulary could look like. So there is.
Sorry, a formulary, just to make sure everyone knows what you're talking about. That's the list of drugs, right?
That's a list of drugs. So they put out a list of what a list of drugs could look like that we could all maybe agree on. And the list of drugs is pretty commonly used medications, and it covers something like 2/3 of the medications that we prescribe. I've had experiences working in other jurisdictions, so I went to Australia and worked there for a period of time, and they have a Pharmacare program. Let me tell you, their system ain't perfect. There's a lot that we can learn from it, though, and excuse me, how Pharmacare works is one of those things. And I can tell you that in primary care, treating marginalized folks who have had substance use disorders, folks who are unhoused, the things that I prescribe daily, the things that I need to make sure that folks can stay healthy, they're all available. They're all available.
It's such a, it is like on one hand, a policy wonk's dream, Pharmacare, because there's so many moving pieces and there's so much jargon. But it really does come down to human beings in our daily lives, in our communities. What do you think it would look like to honor that basic principle of care that we have to each other when it comes to this big, wonky policy area?
Should make my job a lot easier. Yeah, look, I think nobody goes into a health profession thinking about, what I'm really going to do is try to figure out what the cheapest drug is because this person's going to be paying out of pocket. Like, nobody does that. We go into health professions thinking, I'm going to do the best I can for folks. And I think, personally, like selfishly, it makes my job both easier and much more fulfilling to be able to provide care in the way that I want to and that I think people deserve. But I think there's this, there's a moral good here. There's a social good here, and I think that's kind of what this is all about. Is that what is the moral social good here? And the moral social good is folks deserve care. It was always meant to be part of Tommy Douglas's movement, I'll call it a movement.
Yeah.
But the late great Tommy Douglas, he always expected Pharmacare to be there. It was the unfinished piece. It's always been the unfinished piece.
So lovely to hear the perspective of the doctor, because there are human beings on the other side of that relationship too, who are facing these excruciating dilemmas sometimes, and whole communities that are at more risk. Hil, you've come with testimonies from folks. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to share a story of my own with
Hang on just 1 second. Keep talking as we get your mic up, but I just don't want you to get there too quickly.
I'm going to share a story of my own about accessing drugs here in Nova Scotia, and then I'm going to share a couple of testimonials that were submitted in support of the Pharmacare. So I'll start with my own, and as someone with chronic illness, and also someone whose gender identity intersects with the medical system, I have a lot of experience navigating the healthcare system, and I spend a lot of time thinking about public healthcare and Pharmacare, maybe more than I probably should. But over this course of the last several years, my employment has fluctuated and shifted, which means I haven't had a private drug plan for several years. And like Bill was saying, purchasing one is out of the question for me. And in Nova Scotia, there's a family Pharmacare program for low-income people, which I use. But I bring this up because I kind of want to highlight the need for a universal Pharmacare plan, because the one that we have now, it really falls short of covering the cost of the medications I take. There's certain medications that I take less frequently because the costs aren't covered. My copay is front-loaded on the beginning of the year, and so for the first several months of the year, I have incredibly high drug costs that aren't supported at all. And that makes it really hard if I have appointments that line up with that time. Like just a few weeks ago, I had an appointment that I've been waiting for 2 years, and they had several medications that they wanted to trial. And the first one was covered under the formulary, but because the year had just reset, my costs were all front-loaded, and so that would have come to $12 a day for the first 3 months until I was getting financial support for that medication. And so even though there is some kind of support there, it's not sufficient in providing drug plans. And I think it's really important that the drug plans that we're advocating for are universal. Another thing that I encounter with the Nova Scotia Family Pharmacare program is that many drugs that I take require an exception request. So a doctor will have to fill out a form that's then sent to the insurer to decide whether or not that drug will be covered for me. And I have a chronic illness that isn't particularly common. There's not medications created specifically for treating that, and so sometimes there has to be, they're not already pre-approved for that. But in a medical system, in a healthcare setting where it's really hard to get doctor's appointments and doctors are really overloaded with appointment requests, having to book another one just to have a drug covered is more work for me, and I already have a lot of doctor's appointments, and then it's also kind of weighing on the medical system more than it already has to be. Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm going through the mask too, so there's lots going on here. So I think, the universal aspect of Pharmacare is really important because when certain drugs require an exception to be covered, I understand not all drugs can be pre-approved, but when there's a large proportion of them that require an exception to be made, it kind of exceptionalizes the care needs of a lot of people that have different or more expensive medical requirements. And so that is in effect a two-tier system. And if the Pharmacare that we advocate for isn't in the public domain and kind of under the citizens have accountability of that kind of drug review process, then I'm a little worried it won't be much different than what we already have access to here with the Pharmacare programs. So that's my perspective on that. But I also have 2 testimonials that were submitted. So the first one's from Paula, and she says, I'm writing this on behalf of my precious child, adopted from foster care, growing up into adulthood. Children and youth in the Canadian foster care system are more likely to be autistic, though less likely to be diagnosed. Additionally, autistic people in Canada are more likely to have complex conditions creating barriers to health in childhood and participation in secure full-time employment in adulthood. My child has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a connective tissue disease more common in people with autism. Many EDS patients cannot work full-time and therefore cannot access private insurance or afford co-pays. Canadian EDS patients are increasingly seeking medical assistance in dying due to inability to afford necessary medical care, including out-of-country treatment and surgeries and prescription drugs. Disabled people in Canada, especially those with foster care histories, would greatly benefit from Pharmacare and waiving copay. National Universal Pharmacare is a crucial part of ensuring vulnerable Canadians can access the medications they need and deserve. Wow. So that was from Paula. Thanks for submitting that. And then the last one we have is from Shelley Petit, who is chair of the New Brunswick Coalition for People with Disabilities in Fredericton. And she writes, my mom, Terry, is a 78-year-old from Nova Scotia who now lives in St. John. She takes multiple medications for blood pressure and back injury, dizziness, bladder, chronic pain, and more. She's on a fixed income. She's also in the starting stages of dementia and forgets a lot of stuff. She lives on a tight budget. Late November, she made a choice. She couldn't afford the blood pressure meds on top of the other stuff. She refused to not fill items for pain. The week of December 20th, she came down with a cold. The plan was for her to spend Christmas with me, and I would pick her up on Christmas Eve. I called her on the 23rd. She wasn't feeling well and told me she had fallen and banged her knee, but was otherwise okay. However, she sounded off. On the 24th, I called and she was seeing things and saying things that didn't make sense. I immediately called 911. It turned out my mother suffered a stroke due to her untreated low blood pressure. She has a permanent brain injury, has a noticeable limp and a loss of function in her right foot, and has lost almost all ability in her right arm. Thankfully, her speech did come back quite quickly. After the stroke, she spent 3 months in the hospital, 2 weeks of that in intensive care. She now requires 40 hours per week of home care, a specialized boot, nonstop trips to specialists, and more. What is the total cost of this care, and what will the long-term cost of this be? Her meds that she couldn't afford were around $100. Had she told me that, I would have paid, but she figured she had only been on them a couple of months, so no biggie. I was planning to attend the Pharmacare Townhall in Fredericton on Wednesday, but this weekend, my mom had another fall, again to her untreated blood pressure issues. No one should have to experience what my mom is going through and the ripple effects it's having in my family. This is why we need public and universal Pharmacare.
Wow.
Thank you so much for bringing those perspectives, and yeah, this is happening now. There's someone who won't come to the event in Fredericton. This is not an abstract issue, and the fact that there are people living and working in this land and considering medically assisted dying because of lack of medications, because of lack of housing, I think elevates this to an existential crisis, a crisis of profound scale for the morality that we try to uphold. Thank you for making it so real. Sharon, I want you to talk about whatever you came here to, and is in your heart to say, but I know that you study the power of the pharmaceutical industry, and maybe you can help us understand it, how it works. And I have noticed in recent years that when, so many times in the past 2 years alone, when there have been some of these reforms on the table on the path to Pharmacare, or the next step, or there's been a massive lobbying pushback, a quintupling of lobbying efforts just in the last 2 years from the private insurance industry and a quadrupling from the pharmaceutical industry. And often there are patients with heartbreaking stories out front in those industry pushbacks, which is a really complicated thing that I know you understand better than I do. So see if you can weave in some of those themes.
Sure, thanks.
And you got to Mick Jagger that mic, there's no other way.
Okay, is this working?
Keep going, we're going to bring it up.
Okay. Oh, okay, that seems to be working. Yeah, so, like, you mentioned that I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and that's back in 1988, which is when I really got interested in medicine. At that point, I was 43, I thought I was super healthy, I didn't have to think about, sickness for a long time, but lo and behold, I did. I had been working as a journalist and was, a bit of a researcher, and I did a deep dive into, the whole breast cancer treatment, choices and whatnot. And I thought, this is going to be straightforward. Scientists do all this work and they have all the answers. And lo and behold, I discovered that it was really, really political. Medicine is very political. And because I'm interested in politics, that actually kind of intrigued me. And I ended up writing a book called A Patient No More, The Politics of Breast Cancer. I also began working with some other women. I was living in Montreal at the time who had breast cancer, who were around the same age as me, who were also struggling with the same issues. And we started a group called Breast Cancer Action Montreal. We were inspired really by the AIDS activists who at the time were kind of developing a different style of patient advocacy. There have always been groups that get together over an illness, but this was something different where they were really demanding a place at the table. And so we did that with breast cancer, our group, and there were other groups forming around across the country and in the States and other countries. So we became this very much noticed breast cancer movement. But just going back a little bit, when I was diagnosed and during this early period when I was working with other women, drugs for breast cancer were not a big deal. There were only really two styles of drugs. There was the cytotoxic, really old toxic drugs, which is what I had. Not pleasant, but they worked, and I think they were pretty cheap. Then there was this other drug called tamoxifen, which was a hormonal drug. It sold for about $12 a month. But I think most women got it at the pharmacy of the hospital, and it was paid for unless they had private insurance. So we didn't talk a lot about drugs. But during that period, the decade that I was really active in the 90s, other drugs started to come on the market. And there was a drug called Taxol and another drug called Herceptin. And they were just in a whole other price class. They were like thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars for each patient. And so that, drugs started to seem like this was something we need to pay attention to. Meanwhile, the same drug companies that were putting out these new drugs were coming to the patient advocacy groups and offering them money, offering trips to the leaders, offering dinners for the board members. And these relationships started forming. That really bothered me. And our group never, we made a policy that we weren't going to take money from drug companies, but we were very much outliers. And by the time the end of the decade came around, there were all kinds of organizations that had formed patient advocacy groups for this disease, that disease, this condition, and they were almost all taking money from the same drug companies that were, coming up with drugs to treat the conditions. And around that time, I was offered an opportunity to work at Mount St. Vincent University, and I ended up spending 4 years as a university prof and teaching drug policy. So I got out of the sort of, that milieu, but it really gnawed at me, this whole thing about these patient advocacy groups working with drug companies, and I decided to go back to university and do a doctorate looking at that whole question, and really delved into it, did a dissertation, wrote a book called Health Advocacy, Inc., about these relationships.
That was you?
Yeah.
Cool.
Your mother blurred my book.
Yes, she did.
So I wrote that book, which came out in 2017. And it was really, the argument I made was that really these drug companies had bought off the groups and changed them from being grassroots organizations working for the interests of patients to being really marketing platforms for new drugs. Not that they didn't also help the patients. I will say that patients do get something out of working with other patients and getting to know other people who are going through what they're going through. So I'm not dismissing what the groups still do, but this aspect of working closely with the drug companies to me was really problematic. So I continue to write about these issues and particularly about these relationships with patient advocacy groups. And a couple of years ago I was asked by the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions to write a piece on who is it that doesn't want national Pharmacare?
The 10%.
I put copies of the report that came out of that up, and I think it's been passed around. It's also online if you don't have a hard copy and
There
want
it
to
is, the
read
Big
it.
Money Club.
The Big Money Club. So what the Nurses Union wanted me to research was who is standing in the way of national Pharmacare. And basically it is the drug companies, not surprisingly, but also the big insurance companies. There are a lot of think tanks, conservative think tanks like the Fraser Institute and spin-offs of the Fraser Institute. There are the industry-funded patient groups, which will side with the drug companies. And then there are these public relations companies that work, come up with these kind of, arguments for not having Pharmacare. So that was, that was a fun thing to do, but also really disturbing, because these groups have a lot of money and they really, really, really don't want national pharmacare. And you know, we have to really mount a strong opposition to that force.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for all of that work. And it's an unbelievable segue to Matthew's experience, because you've been on the inside of the actual, you know, regulatory process. And so I know this is not the only thing that you've done, obviously, right? And I think the question of intellectual property and the claims of the industry to the sacred nature of protecting their research and development, all that stuff is at the heart of some of the politics of this. But maybe start with why you resigned from that position, if you don't mind. And is that a way that you can get into your story about this?
I'll try. So
lean into your mic, we're going to raise it as you speak.
So the resignation, which became official in February, was something I was contemplating for quite some time, through a lot of the pandemic, frankly. And just to back up a tiny bit, I joined the board because I wanted to do some good from inside government. I thought there was a real opportunity with the former Minister of Health, Jane Philpott, who announced some major reforms to how we try and regulate drug prices in this country back in 2017. Rather sweeping reforms, really. We've had the system since we entered into NAFTA. It hasn't worked. Outside of the US and Switzerland, our drug prices are the highest in the world. There's reasons for that I can explain, but it's basically how we regulate drug prices, and the changes that Minister Philpott announced promised significant change. COVID changed everything. The pressure grew to not create a system that would apparently discourage the entry of new drugs into the Canadian market. That was the threat that was made again and again. Huge amounts of pressure, the kinds of tactics that Sharon's work so deeply points to, engaging patient groups who may not have a lot of information about whether drugs are coming to Canada or being launched in Canada. Those voices grew, direct lobbying to people in the political sphere. We're an arm's length body, and we were supposed to, be shielded from that. Yes, we have to consult, we have to think through in conversation with the public, with stakeholders, with industry, about how those changes would actually work, right? You make a change in law, but they need to be further particularized through changes in guidelines, so we consulted heavily, but at every turn we met resistance. And what really was the point at which I decided I couldn't see a way to do good from the inside anymore, was when our own process was directly interfered with by the political sphere.
The Minister of Health.
The Federal Minister of Health.
Yeah.
And so I felt at that time it was the time to speak up and leave. And part of the reason I struggled with that decision, there is sort of a silver lining, is that the agency that I was a part of, right, this is a part-time role. The people who sit atop the board were appointed by cabinet. They're part-time positions, even the chair. But there is a staff in Ottawa. It hasn't always been the case, but under the leadership of a new executive director who was appointed in 2013, 2014, the culture had changed significantly. They understood monopoly power and abuse, and they were dedicated to changing things. And so part of why I struggled with this decision so much was I didn't want to undermine the organization. Those people are still there, by and large, and are trying to bring about change from the inside as their full-time job. And so the power of industry and everything that goes alongside of it remains. Those people remain. And I'm trying to advocate from the outside, but there are still good people inside trying to carry on that work. We have a hearing coming up. The Minister of Health will be before a parliamentary committee on Thursday of this week. There'll be a follow-up hearing on May 2nd that I'll be a part of, and other colleagues who've resigned, so perhaps there's a moment of accountability that will come. But I'm in that sort of dark state of mind about the prospect of Pharmacare at present.
I mean, it was a few stages. So I remember when Jane Philpott brought in those reforms, they were going to be save the public purse billions and Canadians billions and billions of dollars, and it would have had an impact on the profits of pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. And as I recall, there were like 3 stages where it kind of got narrowed and narrowed what they were actually going to do. And then it was at the final stage where the minister felt there just needed to be one more round of conversations with buddies in industry there. And I think that, from the outside, that looked like the breaking point for you. Can you describe what it was like to be inside that? You came in because there was a progressive minister who wanted to do something that you felt was like a structural reform, billions of dollars on the table of savings for Canadians, and that's human stories, as we've been hearing tonight. And then to see it sort of whittled away over a number of years. What was your experience of that?
It was devastating. And I would say it was all the more devastating for the staff who were actually getting ready to implement the changes to enforce the new rules. Through each of those sort of periods, we went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out how we could save money for healthcare systems. It's important to point out that the fastest growing contributor to healthcare costs provincially is expenses on drugs. And so this is an area where the federal government clearly has jurisdiction, right? It's more complicated, but not to get too legalistic, but under the Patent Act, which the federal government has jurisdiction over under our Constitution, they can do a fair bit of stuff with respect to patented medicines, not generic ones, but the ones that tend to be more highly priced. And yet that political will was lacking. I should add here though, it is a bit easy to sort of focus on that intervention by the federal minister of health and folks in his office. When we started that process of reform in 2017, there were provinces who were very supportive and vocal about their support for these changes. Those provincial allies grew more and more silent over time. And what that really reveals is the level of influence, power, money, resources, and time that is invested in imposing these changes, because the focus wasn't just on the federal sphere, but the provincial one as well. Major supporters of those reforms, governments of Ontario and Quebec, were far less supportive later on. And so it was court challenges. The changes that were proposed were challenged in court successfully. 2 out of the 3 sort of major reforms that we had on the table were invalidated by the Quebec Court of Appeal. All of the lobbying, patient groups that were deeply connected to the pharmaceutical industry, might have even been one drug, the newest cystic fibrosis drug, which is a wonderful therapy from everything I understand. But it did a lot.
It was recognized in that fight.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Many of us received, threats on a regular basis. So the level of time spent opposing what we were trying to do it's hard to even grasp. And the regulator has 80 people in Ottawa and 5 part-time board members when it's at full strength, which it certainly isn't now.
So Pfizer made $50 billion last year on the COVID vaccine alone. Yeah. So I guess that's a lot of expense account. Lobbyists, lawyers, commercials, patient advocacy group funding, relationship building. There's a lot of billions of dollars of relationship building there. Those seem like big odds. One of the things that we hear, and I want to open this up to everyone to reflect on, is that Pharmacare would cost like $15 billion a year. And it sounds like a lot of money. And I think for people who are going to go out and talk to their neighbors about this and actually try to build a counterpower to those tidal waves of money that we're talking about that have delayed progress for decades, we need answers too for what we say when someone says, oh, that sounds expensive. Can we really afford that? You folks? Bill, grab a mic anyone.
Absolutely, happy to. This number comes out as a result of splitting private and public costs and not understanding that we're dealing with total cost. Yes, it will cost. It's going to still cost money. There have been academic papers out there that have put the savings at between $4 and $10 billion a year. But what I like to do is to compare us to other systems that are very similar. We often tie Finland as very similar healthcare systems. They have Pharmacare. If we got their prices, we would save $15 billion a year. To put that in perspective here in Halifax, that is a brand new hospital in Nova Scotia every single year. So this is not a cost output. We're saving money, but we have to remember it's total cost. It's not public versus private cost.
But then they say, but if you don't let us charge all this money for drugs, then how can we possibly do the research and development into these life-saving medicines? Does anyone have the facts and figures about this? I find it so outrageous. Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of stories about how much it costs to develop a drug. The estimates that are used most often, not just by industry, but sometimes policy folks as well, are industry numbers. They are, as best we can tell, based upon inflated estimates that include things like promotion and marketing, not costs of actual research and development. And in the cases where we can peel back the layers and get a more granular assessment of who did what when, how much money was spent, the numbers are lower, and the numbers where the spending actually is greatly on the public sector side. A lot of, not just the the sort of early stage discovery stuff, the animal studies before it's tested in humans, but clinical trials, and even in some cases, downstream work to make sure it's made in a high quality way and safe for us to consume, is heavily spent and subsidized by the public sector, by us. So the idea that drugs, the industry needs to be able to recoup their costs is overstated in my view.
And what is the pharmaceutical industry spending in terms of research and development now, compared to, let's say, 15 years ago?
So, sorry, I won't monopolize this, but the one part of why we changed our laws many years ago to make it more pharma-friendly, if I can put it that way, was we thought they would do more research here if we did so. And maybe in the 1980s that was a fair objective to have, but to continue to let that hold sway when we have decades and decades of experience that shows us they can't even allocate 10% of their sales in Canada towards R&D, research and development. The latest figure last year, I think, was 3.2% or something in that neighborhood, which is the lowest that they've spent in many years. It's pretty stunning, right? That policy objective of getting more trials done here and all the economic benefits that might flow from that, it hasn't happened, and we have to stop sort of just trusting that will happen if we bend yet again on some other policy issue.
So just to clarify, we did bend, we made it more profitable for them, and they're now spending like a third of what they did 10, 15 years ago on research and development.
Yeah, the last time they hit the 10% of their sales target on R&D was 2002.
So you're armed with your talking points when they come at you with that one? Good. Let's open up the conversation. And unfortunately, we don't have wireless mics. But if you have a friend with a loud voice, if you need help projecting, I'd love to get questions for the panel. As well, if you, because we've been talking about the reality that people are facing. If you have a story that relates to this issue of drug prices in your own life, I would love to hear it, and I know people on the panel would as well. And yeah, let's start over here. Yeah, we can get the mic ready. It might be easier to get bills.
Okay, so I'll two real quick. I was in an institution for 10 years against my will. And it totally is a mess. But anyway, that's beside the point. When I was there, I have a hormone condition. And my hormone bills were not covered. Rather than tell me that, they switched me to birth control, which is not the level of what I need. As a result, I got really sick. suicidal and a bunch of crazy stuff. Hormones are no joke, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if my father had, one thing, the only reason I found out I was on the wrong drug is because I went to my endocrinologist and he was like, why are you on birth control? And they, like, you can't have children. That's the whole condition. So why are you on birth control? And he's like, I think the nurse said it's the same thing. He's like, it's not. And they're actually making your symptoms way worse. What the hell? And luckily, my dad has money because he was in the military. So he paid for my drugs. Still does. And another one, I have a friend who's got a little daughter who's 6, and she has violent syndrome, which causes really like life-threatening seizures in her daughter. And then we're going to the hospital by ambulance at least 3 times a week because their kid was gonna die. Now they found that CBD oil helps her. She hasn't been to the hospital for a seizure in a year.
Wow.
After going 3 times a week for the first 5 years of her life. But they will not cover the cost of her CBD oil. Her mother only works part-time because of her severe disability needs. And they have to resort to GoFundMe and fundraisers for their daughter's medication, so her daughter doesn't die. Now there is a petition in the House to have those covered, but would those be included? Would you fight for CBD oil or alternative therapy like that to be covered by universal Pharmacare as well? Because like I'm talking, the 6-year-old is not taking CBD oil to have a good time. She's taking it to save her life. It is a medical necessity, and her parents have to resort to begging for money on the internet so their kid doesn't die.
That's just bonkers. That's just bonkers. What a powerful testimony. Thank you so much.
I think this will be
Thank you, Sharon. Does anyone want to take on the question of how alternative therapies and how a more expansive vision of care can be supported by universal single-payer Pharmacare?
Everyone's looking at me like I'm going to stand I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that because that's actually not my expertise. But what I will say is that, so I alluded earlier to the fact that I had worked in Australia, and I had said that, there's a lot that we can learn from their system, even though there's a whole lot there that is not perfect, folks. But one of the things that I was struck by in terms of their Pharmacare system is how they made their formulary. That's the list of drugs. Sorry, folks, for the jargon earlier. And they had 2 kind of ways to do things, right? They have this way that's the sort of standard, like there's a randomized control trial times 1 bajillion, and they have the thing in the pharmaceutical company and the blah, 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 and all that kind of system. And I'm going to let Matt Herder speak to that. But there's this sort of standard system, and they have to go through this thing in a fairly timely fashion. And the kind of the way that those decisions are made are around what is the population benefit to having a particular drug on the formulary. And I think that that's an important thing to think about, right? Because when we're thinking about a national Pharmacare program, we're thinking about how do we get care to all folks who need it. So that's a really important piece. But then there was this other piece, and I think that that's also really important, which is to say that there was an entirely different approval system for medications that were life-saving or life-changing. And I think that's another piece that I think we need to keep in mind. There are going to be drugs, there are going to be therapies, there are going to be things that are not used by a whole lot of folks, that they'll kind of be exceptional things. They won't have a huge population benefit. But boy, for the person for whom they need, that needs that thing, whatever the thing is, it's life-changing or it's life-saving. And there's an entirely separate process for that. And the metrics are not the population benefit, it's the like, is this gonna save somebody's life? And so lots of the medications, lots of the kind of patient advocacy groups, lots of that sort of thing is around, but what about this drug that I need? And if I don't get this drug or this therapy or this whatever, I can't live without whatever it is. And there needs to be a way to think about those things. But the good news is there are jurisdictions that have done that work. There are models that we can look to, that we can think about, okay, well, how does this apply in this context to this place? So I don't know if that's an answer to the question, but I do think it's an important point.
It does, because there's the specific need for care, and then there's how we take care of each other at the population, at the societal level. And they're both supported by having a system that is actually for everyone. They don't have to be the same mechanism. Let's bring in another voice in the audience. Yeah.
I'll try to project.
Oh, you got the voice. Yeah.
Doing a good job. I'm a postdoc researcher at Dalhousie, currently working on a project on public health governance. So excuse me if I get jargony. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. But I'm curious. I understand that here today we're starting a conversation. But I'm curious about the accountability and the living aspect of the policy that we need to create. In that we're not creating a policy, we're not arguing for a policy that's static and unchanging. That policy itself, from the point that it's drafted, needs to be able to grow to speak to these new drugs that come out on the market, or these therapies coming into place that we're not aware of. And I mean, in this room, we're having an important public discussion, but this room also contains only a very certain section of the public. There's a lot of voices that aren't being represented in this room right now. So I just want to really add that to the discussion, that we're not just talking about something that needs to be created once and then maintained. It needs to be created with flexibility involved and with really deliberative, collaborative engagement, particularly with equity-deserving communities in our public.
And it would think about our whole healthcare system if it had been designed that way from the start. It would be we'd be in a different position today. But that's such a foundational principle. Thank you. Thank you for that.
So thank you. One of the things that I think we've done a lot of thinking about. I'm the leader of the NDP party here in Nova Scotia. This is the college season. And one of the things that we have done a lot of thinking about that hasn't come so much, a little bit from you, Bill, and from you, Dr. Dara, is the intersection at this moment between the cost of drugs and the cost of living. And so we know, Feed Nova Scotia did a study, 50% of their clients are choosing between food and medicine every month. This was a few years ago, we assume it's worse now. So I just want to put in a little pitch, because one of the things, as we fight for a universal single-payer Pharmacare program, which we fully support, one of the things that we also are trying to do as a stopgap, as a step, and the provincial Pharmacare programs came up, is we are calling for an immediate freeze on all of the fees associated with both family and seniors Pharmacare. Because we're in a cost of living crisis and we're in a healthcare crisis, and this is a very simple thing that the provincial government could enact tomorrow. They could stop receiving that payment from Nova Scotians, all of whom if they're on that program, have been means tested. Of course, we want a universal program, but in the meantime, this should be an easy sell to everybody. And so if you are talking to your friends and neighbors, or if you do have a story that you want to share, I think it was very powerful, this testimony about the way that those co-payments are front-loaded and the difficulty that people have in affording those, and the paucity of the program in general. But if you are talking to your friends and neighbors, this is a thing that the provincial government can do right now, which is to freeze those payments, allow people to afford their medications, maybe then afford more food, maybe then also stay out of the emergency room.
A powerful point. Thank you. Yeah, it's as I understand it here, there's a cruelty to this that they call it a cap on what your copay is, but in fact, as you explained, it's a massive onslaught at the beginning of every month or every period. where you have to be broke. They will break you before you get the benefit, which is to me emblematic of how we treat public services now.
Yeah.
Not only is it needs tested, but we require you to sacrifice everything before you can have what is your right as a human being, access to medicine.
This is one of my favorite topics. When you talk about co-payments, you're talking about a tax on the sick. That's it. That's what it is. And what's insane about these things is that they don't do what they purport to do. They were brought in originally to reduce abuse. And I ask, what abuse? I'm an asthmatic. I'm not going to overtake my drugs. I don't know anybody who is going to take too much insulin. Yes, there are some drugs out there. The problem is it started in the States with a program or with a research with RAND. And they looked at co-payments for doctor's visits. And yes, it reduced the number of people going to doctors, but it was the poor. And then they took this research and they just planted it on top of pharmaceuticals. And it was how insurance companies started to reduce their costs. There is no reason to have co-payments at all. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul.
I'm going to bring you a mic because I just discovered that we're live streaming. Yeah, we just want to make sure that people who are watching online can hear as well.
Oh.
Do you want to meet me in the middle? In like a classic Canadian compromise?
It's not hurry.
You can come this far. I come all this way. My way
I come originally from the UK, where we have had a national public drug plan since the 1940s. And if you look around at Europe, I mean, we can discuss endlessly the details of what should it look like and this and that and the other, but so many countries have already done it. I come to Canada, I have paid as much as $15,000 a year for medication for my daughter. And God knows where she would be if we had not been able to do that. And some years it's been considerably more than that. And I just think this, guys, is not rocket science. Like right across Europe, they have national public Pharmacare plans. Australia, New Zealand, you know, like we're not reinventing the wheel here. We just have to get the legislation in place.
All right. Okay, let's do one more, and then because that was a call to action if I've ever heard one. Great. You got another?
This is a.
We'll find one on board.
Hello. This isn't my story, but I've heard it twice, so I have to say it. One fellow, I was out canvassing, and he told me that his friend took a part-time job, no benefits, very common, isn't covered. He has a heart condition. He can't pay for his heart medication, so he has to quit his job, of course, and go on social assistance so that he can have his heart medication covered. I also had a friend years ago, the same thing. It keeps people from working, it keeps people out of the workforce, and it does a damage to mental health, to when you could be, you know, doing something and useful in the way that you would feel like you would like to be, but because of your medical condition, you have to stay on social assistance, and it's that is on multiple levels a problem for us.
Thank you. Robin, you had someone else. This will be the last one.
And I don't know if the.
I'm trying to get some more people. I think we'll reach. Go on.
Just to add on to that situation, so many more workers are working in the gig economy now and don't even have proper employment because they work for an app, right? And now we've got AI, which is going to displace lots of people.
That's all we got.
And so to have any kind of healthcare provision attached to work when the nature of work is precarious and crappy and getting worse, it's just bad planning for us, good planning for them. Okay.
Hello,
Hi there.
my name is Michael Parsons. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Canadian HIV/AIDS and Chronic Pain Society. I've been living with HIV/AIDS and aging chronic pain, diabetes, a heart condition due to the age drugs that keep me alive, and arthritis, you know, and I must say that the Pharmacare system in Nova Scotia really made a huge difference to me. I remember paying out for my side effect medication when I was working. And then the Pharmacare program came in, and it was a godsend. It really was. But there's also, you know, you're talking about having 2/3 of the drugs covered. There's the other third, you know, which is the CBD oils. And for me, it's Saxenda, you know, that I pay $250 every 2 months to get that drug. And it increases my quality of life. It helps my heart work better. It helps keep my diabetes more under control. It does a lot of good for me. But, you know, even if I could get it down to $125 every 2 months, that would be a big difference. Because I do have a limited income. Because of my disabilities, I'm lucky to be able to work part-time with the disabilities that I have. So even, like, this is one of the things that I've been pushing around this whole Pharmacare program. It has to be fluid, and it has to look at, I think, copay systems, you know, maybe they're a necessary evil, you know? Because if we can find a way to put the drugs, to get the drugs so that we can have them, that's better than not having them at all. For sure. And this is a conversation that nobody seems to want to be taking up. You know, is what about those other third of the drugs? Everything isn't going to be covered. That's just unrealistic. Not everything's not going to be on the formulary. But at least the things that are not on the formulary, get the prices down. Do that group negotiations the government can do to get their prices down for everyone.
It's the power of the collective. That's what you're talking about. That's right. It's the power of the public in purchasing. And I mean, this is a movement building event for that very reason. I think we've heard two eloquent calls for flexibility and adaptability in the thing that we're fighting for. I think that's come through loud and clear. And what's also clear, and this is why I want to pass it over to the next section of the evening now, is that we don't have a policy problem. We don't have a research and development or intellectual property problem. We have a power problem. We haven't built the power yet to demand a system that takes care of everyone, that is flexible enough to actually hear from others, that shifts the balance of power in society so that the momentum is on our side as an everybody, so that the people who have a different story, who have a different need, who have a specific situation, can actually work within a context where the principle is everyone is beloved, everyone deserves care. It can't be because of your ability to pay. It can't be because you're lucky enough to have someone who has the magic card that comes in and swipes it at the last second. We're talking about fundamental human rights. And we're talking about how we build the power to win that as a principle of the Pharmacare system. So to me, I think we've heard some really great interventions from specific and communities within the collective. And that should make us fight harder for something that's universal, for something that's flexible, for something that is adaptive, for something that can iterate. But we have to get it going. So, we've got some organizers who are going to help focus some of this stuff into action. Do people feel ready to get active? I do too. So first of all, let's thank the panel for an incredible presentation. What a moving story that we've woven together tonight, and I think a really motivating one. Nik is here. Robin is just doing the first recruiting job of the night. Victoria's the first signature on the petition. Yes, thank you. Come on, take the mic and do your thing. We're gonna barnstorm now. There might be a little bit of a full contact activity, so get ready to embrace your neighbor. Not literally, of course.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. Thanks again to the panelists. That was wonderful. Really, really amazing to hear the experience and the knowledge that is here in the room with us. I feel like that was what we wanted to happen for this town hall, and I'm glad that it really came out. My name is Nik Barry-Shaw. I'm the Trade and Privatization Campaigner with the Council of Canadians. I'm from Montreal, Quebec. I'm here on tour for Pharmacare, for public Pharmacare now. And thank you. And so I just want to kind of emphasize that this is the beginning, right? We are starting the fight now. We know what Big Pharma is doing. We've done the research. Look, after the supply and confidence agreement was signed between the Liberals and the NDP, when they committed to passing a Pharmacare Act by the end of 2023, the lobbying went through the roof. Okay? Pharmaceutical company lobbyists and insurance company lobbyists were meeting just with the health minister. We just looked at the health minister. For the 9 months after that commitment to bring in a public Pharmacare plan was made in March 2022. In those 9 months, the health minister and his top advisors met with these industry lobbyists a total of 150 times. 150 times over 9 months. That's 3 to 4 times per week. Whether it's a holiday, whether it's a long weekend, it doesn't matter. They're meeting 3 to 4 times, almost every day. They might as well have shared office space at that point. The health minister is so close. So we're not going to get public Pharmacare just because it's the rational thing to do, just because the facts are on our side, just because the morality is correct. We are going to get it because we have to fight for it. Okay? And we have people here who have been fighting for it for years. Bill has been fighting for it for years. Aruna, Hil, Sharon, and Matt, they're fighting for it. We need people in this room to step up. We need you to fight for it with us. That's where we're at now. We have to get this story in the media. With this tour, with these town halls, we've been doing that. We had CTV here earlier. We had Sharon on the biggest lunchtime radio show, I believe. Bill was on radio as well. We've been getting it in the media. That's one thing. So far it's working. But we need grassroots pressure. We need you. We need you to go out and start talking to your MPs. They need to know that there is a constituency for us. They need to know that there are people who are mobilized, who are angry, and who are watching what they're doing on this file. Because the Liberals would love nothing more. They would love nothing more than to slink away from this. Slink away and pretend like they never actually promised. Or try to palm off some sort of second-hand policy that will be another patch in a completely unsustainable and unjust patchwork system that we have now. And so we need to go to them and we need to say, we understand this issue. We need public Pharmacare now. We know there's a clear plan that's laid out before us. It's been sitting on your desk for 4 years. You're my MP. You're supposed to represent us. What are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? So we have Liberal MPs all around us. Some of you live in their ridings. We need to be talking to them. We invited Andy Fillmore here. I know the chapter, the HRM chapter, did amazing organizing work to have this happen. They invited Andy Fillmore. Is he here? Did he send somebody? No. Andy. Who else? Darren Fisher. Darren Fisher, did he send somebody? Is there like, I don't want to be slighting Darren Fisher, send someone to come. I know these are busy. No, they didn't come either. Okay? So we have work to do. Right? Who's in Andy Fillmore's riding? I want to see if you can put your hand up. Who's in Andy? A lot of people in Andy Fillmore's riding. All right, keep your hand up. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. That's good. Okay, because it's a two-part thing. You don't get it off that easy. We need people. Who's going to commit to go and meet with Andy Fillmore? Who's going to do it?
Jerry.
Wave your hand. Jerry. Can you stand up and say your name? Do we have a runner?
Yeah, we've got people on clipboard.
Because we're gonna get. Can we get a clipboard moving? We're gonna take your name. So we have Jerry here. Yep. What's your name?
My name is Marilyn McMillan, and he is my neighbor. He lives just a few doors up.
Perfect. Thank you, Marilyn McMillan. We'll get a clipboard here. Yes. Your name?
Amy Moonshadow.
All right. Amy Moonshadow. You're going to meet with Andy as well. Tell him how important it is.
We get a clipboard?
Let's get a clipboard here. Yeah. Anyone else in Andy Fillmore's riding who wants to go join them? Yes. Sir, what's your name? If you can say it loud, I'll repeat it. Okay. That's good. Andrew Glencross. He knows we got the veterans on this case. Good. Anyone else in Andy Fillmore's riding?
Hi, Ian Johnson. I live in this riding. I've met with him many times in the past. As you can
All right. This is good. This is a very good start.
Ian's a former board member of the Health Coalition as well.
Other than Halifax, I'm not from Halifax, as you can
Who lives near me, oh my goodness, my brain's still working. Darren Fisher. All right, I see a lot of hands. Who wants to come meet Darren Fisher with me? Amazing. I see Kat, I see Andrew, I see Eveline, I see some friends we haven't met yet. I see Robert, I see our other friend. Okay. Darren Fisher, he's got it coming at him.
Mariana, but I also happen to be the chair of the Federation of Labor's Political Action Committee, so I'll certainly put this on my agenda for our next meeting, which I'm scheduling, so that our members, hopefully, who are across the province, can put it, I think it's something that we've been working on, so I will make that part of our agenda at the Federation of Labor.
Amazing.
So we did Dartmouth, is that your riding? Dartmouth, we did Halifax. Anyone in your riding other than Dartmouth and Halifax? What's your riding? What's your riding up there?
Halifax.
It's Halifax West.
Another doorstop. They're all the same.
All right. We gotta tell them that. We gotta tell them to stop being doorstops.
My name is Jocelyn Coates.
Jocelyn Coates. Thank you, Jocelyn. That's amazing. All right, Halifax West coming in. Anyone else in Halifax West gonna join Jocelyn? Anyone else? Yeah. Any other ridings other than those three? We have our whole North Shore chapter.
Carol, are
Yes.
you going to be with me?
Cape Breton. Cape Breton. Anyone else from Cape Breton?
The North Shore, just to say that the North Shore chapter has Dr. Stephen Ellis, Tory MP. We will likely not meet with him.
Yes, sir. What's your name, sir?
My name is Rocky Silligar, and I would just like to add that I have been, I guess in the early years, between 2015 when the Trudeau government first got elected, and probably about 2017, 2018, I used to see Darren Fisher regularly, probably twice a year, and every time I saw him, I would needle him about Pharmacare. And since then, all the way through the pandemic and so on, every time there's been a fall update for financial or a budget, every time I can think of, I send him an email, I make a phone call, I get nowhere, I just get the party line. Anyway, not saying to be discouraged, we have to keep after it. The other thing I want to raise, though, is kind of a different issue. I mean, right now here tonight, we're with the Council of Canadians, and not to want to sound unsupportive of that, because I don't know, other than having been very familiar with Maud Barlow for years, I don't know that much about the Council, to be honest. I know it's been around a long time. But I live and I get emails from the Canadian Labour Congress, the Nova Scotia Trades Council or whatever it is, Lead Now, the Broadbent Institute, the Public Service Alliance of Canada. I get everybody needling me about all these wonderful things they all want to do to help us get Pharmacare. But, and we know that 90% of Canadians want it.
Do you have a question?
What are we doing to try and bring all of these disparate groups together to form some kind of united team to fight for it? We as the Council of Canadians can't do it on our own. We need to get the groups together into some kind of collective coalition.
I will speak to that very briefly. I think as a campaigner, we only started doing these town halls like now. This is the first one. It's been months of work. We've been working with Canadian Doctors for Medicare. That was how we connected with Dr. Aruna Dara, through connections with them. We've been working with the Canadian Health Coalition and so on. And so there has been a lot of groundwork that's been laid. I think there's always more work you can do to reach out and build a broader coalition. But we are working with a lot of groups around this issue, and we're trying to make that broad coalition even broader. But I want to go back to the point you just made, which is that there are a lot of people sending emails. We love emails. It's a great way to do something low energy, low cost. We need to do more. You can't, and so I'm thrilled by the number of people who said they're going to go and meet with MPs, because MPs notice that, right? That there's a difference. When they get a bunch of emails, they say, yeah, it's a bunch of emails, you know? When they get people knocking on their door and insisting, I want to meet with you, I want to talk to you about this, it's important, and I'm with new people that you've never seen before. And they're upset about this too. They want to know why you're caving into Big Pharma. They want to know why you haven't moved on this policy that you've been promising us since 2019. You know? And then now you've promised again, and you put it in writing, and you said the government may fall over this if we don't do it by the end of the year. So what are you doing? We don't, we want Pharmacare. We don't want a Pierre Poilievre government. We want Pharmacare. We want public Pharmacare now. So the next step, I think, is we need to canvass. Okay, this is something that Halifax chapter did already. Our intrepid co-executive director, Robin Tress, has done it as well. And what that involves is we have pamphlets, we have petition forms, and we go out into your neighborhood, you choose a pharmacy, you hang out outside the pharmacy, and you ask people, are you fed up with the high prices you're paying for drugs? Did you know that Canada pays the third highest prices in the world for drugs? You want to help us change that. Sign this petition, take this flyer. Yes.
People already did.
Wonderful.
Marilyn, Susan, Maureen, Francis, Sarah. You're on canvassing. Great job. Liliana, Jonathan, and Nancy. Great work. Enjoy it. Campus party.
Also, snail mail is good.
Snail mail is good.
People are writing letters and sending it to their MP in Ottawa. Doesn't even need a stamp.
And you sent it for free.
To Ottawa, for sure.
But so I think canvassing is important because it allows us to make those connections. If there's anyone else who hasn't signed up for canvassing yet, I'm going to let Robin maybe describe the canvassing, because if you've done canvassing on a political campaign for a candidate, it can be tough. If you do it on climate, it can be tough sometimes, but it's different for Pharmacare.
Yeah. For Pharmacare, we're canvassing to get people out to this event. Is anyone here who got a flyer on the street? No, maybe they left already. I've been canvassing for plenty of things, and often people are quite rude. But this time, I was talking to people on the street, and they were saying things like, thank God you're doing this. I'm so glad someone is talking about this. I will absolutely sign your petition. Thank you so much. Like, it was actually a really pleasant way to spend time and talk to people in the community, and also really, kind of heartbreaking to hear the stories that people were telling me just on the street we stood outside the pharmacy, which was a great place to talk to people about how expensive medicine is. But people were coming out and saying things like, I just paid $100 for this thing I can't live without, or my mother can't afford her stuff. So it was like simultaneously uplifting to see so many people interested in this topic, and very smack in the face of reality of how bad that situation really is.
So have you got these by writing?
We don't have them by writings. We'll get there. We got to organize it at the end. We were going to do a big call out and see who wanted to do window signs. But you all beat me to it, which is great. So I'm just going to congratulate everyone. If you signed up to take a window sign, we have them, where are they? They're at the back. You can grab them on your way out, or maybe we can get them handed out now. Amazing. So all of these people, wave your hands. We'll give you a big round of applause. You're going to hand out window signs to your neighbors, and you're going to get them right now. Congrats. Liliana, Jonathan, we love you. Carol, Marilyn, Sarah, Maureen, Francis, Sarah again, Sue, window signs for all of you. Oh my God, so many people. Victoria, Mary, Mitch, Rowan, Jocelyn, oh my God, it just keeps coming. We got so many people. Kim, Adam, Linda, Mike, and Ainsley. Look how many window signs we're gonna have. Anna, Mary, Nancy, Joanna, Joanne, Andrew. Hey, Andrew, we're bringing home some signs. And other Andrew, you're also bringing home some signs. Thank you so much. I think this is like 100.
I didn't get one of those.
One of these sign-ups? Here you go. It's so exciting to see all of you here and to know that, like, now we're having MP meetings. Now we're raising the conversation. Now our neighbors are going to have these signs, which means you also get to have a conversation with them. So, great work, everyone.
Yeah, so thank you. Really amazing. I'm really excited for carrying on this campaign into the future. Yeah, go ahead.
What is the status of the current agreement between the NDP and the Liberals in terms of moving ahead this year on farmers? What is the status of that?
The status is the Liberals say, well, we didn't put it in the budget. We didn't do anything about it. It's been over a year since they promised it. They say it's still coming. Don't worry, it's coming. That's the status of it. They say there's going to be legislation. It's supposed to come in the fall. What we're concerned about, and I think it's a big risk, and when we're going to meet with MPs, when we're talking with people, we have to be crystal clear on this. We want what's in the Hoskins report. We want a public, single-payer system where we can negotiate lower prices like every other country in the U.S. does, right? That is fundamental. And that's what the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance industry, they're lobbying hard against. They want something that's watered down, that's just another patchwork. And that's what we have to fight against. And so, I just want to say, again, I'm really amazed by the outpouring of implication, and I'm really excited to work with you on these MP meetings, and work with the chapter and with the regional organizers to get you set up to do these canvasses, find a pharmacy in your area, go and talk to people, bring them into the campaign. And I think we're going to be envisioning doing a day of action sometime in the fall, because that's when this is really going to be heating up. And I think, again, we're going to need allies. We're going to need a broader coalition. We're going to continue to build that at the national level, at a local and regional level, and we're going to show that this is something that people care about, that this is something that is affecting them on a day-to-day basis. In some cases, it's a life or death issue for people, and we're not going to let it go. We're not going to let the Liberals slink away from this room. We're going to hold them to it.
As I said in the beginning, I'll say again now, I'm so glad to see you all here in this room. It's so heartwarming, and it feels very powerful to me to see so many people committing to take different kinds of actions to make sure that this isn't just a conversation that happens in this room, but it's something that really grows into our communities. As we mentioned at some point, this is the first of more than 15 town halls across the country, so I just can't wait to see what happens when we have these kind of conversations 15 more times in other cities, hearing more people taking more commitment. Like, this movement is really growing, and I'm just so glad that I could start here in Halifax, where I live. So I'm delighted to have spent this evening with you. Yeah, have a great evening. Before you go, you'll see this membership form in front of you. Council of Canadians is funded almost entirely by membership. We've never taken any corporate money or from the government. So if you're feeling inclined to become a member, make a donation. The form is in front of you. We'll be happy and grateful to accept your donation to support more work like this in all of our further town halls and Pharmacare work. So you'll hear from us soon. We'll give you a call. Have a great evening. See you around.